Hey, accounting scholars. We're going to embark on something today that has been a long time coming for you. And what I mean by that is you guys have been toiling in math classes for many years now, probably wondering, am I ever going to use this stuff? Well, I'm pleased to report today that you are going to be using that stuff. We're actually going to be talking specifically about slope and rise and run and the x-axis and the y-axis and all those good things that you've learned in your algebra and other related math classes. So the reason this is important from a business standpoint is businesses are very concerned about how their costs behave relative to their activity level or revenue. And this is a relatively basic concept that most of us can see in the retail marketplace every day. Let's say you buy a, uh, a package of paper towels, one, two, or three at Jewel. You're going to pay a higher price for that package of paper towels. Say for three paper towels, let's say it's going to be $2 for three paper towels. Then if you went to Sam's Club and you bought a large quantity of paper towels, where it might be the cost for three paper towels might be 50 cents if you buy a large quantity. And the reason for this particular phenomena is typically the more stuff that you make or the more stuff that you buy, it's usually cheaper to make and therefore cheaper to buy. And this relates to cost and revenue behavior. Specifically, and we're going to start introducing some algebraic concepts here. On the x-axis, you'll typically see in the cost revenue behavior graph activity level, and this could be in units, or in the case of this particular graph, units converted to revenue. And then on the y-axis, you're actually going to see cost data. And typically that will show the relationship between the unit volume as it increases and the costs as those unit volumes increases. And typically the other concept here is the concept of relevant range. By relevant range, we specifically mean when you want to establish a relationship between revenue and costs, you want to pick a range that is most likely indicative of your particular business. For instance, if Apple manufactures between 7 and 10 million iPhones a week, that would be the relevant range they would be concerned about as it relates to cost. They wouldn't be necessarily concerned about when they manufacture 2 million or when they manufacture 50 million a week, because those aren't part of the relevant range. The other factor that you want to be concerned about is something called the activity driver. An activity driver is a way to identify factors that cause the observed changes in the cost of revenue associated with a particular curve. For example, an activity driver would be an increase in orders, for instance. Apple introduces a new product that would, and promotes it, the Apple 5S or whatever, that would be a activity That would be an activity driver. Okay, so again, kind of get your algebra hat on here. The x-axis is typically the activity level, units and/or revenue, going from smaller quantities and revenue to larger quantities, and similar. The y-axis is typically the cost axis. Okay, so costs are an interesting phenomena. And when we talk about costs, we talk about typically three different types of costs, and we're going to develop some algebraic relationships to define these. The first cost is fixed costs, and fixed costs are costs associated with manufacturing products that don't typically change. For instance. Utility costs, the cost of lighting a factory, typically wouldn't change over a month's time, whether you manufacture 2,000 units or whether you manufacture 10,000 units. If you're operating your plant from 8 to 5 every day, you have the lights on from 8 to 5, and that cost doesn't change. Therefore, that would be considered a fixed cost, and that's basically what is shown here on the x and y axis of this particular graph. Fixed costs tend to be flat over a relevant range. On the other hand, you see the yellow area here, which is variable costs, and you can see as units increase, the variable costs increase. This would make perfect sense when you think about it from a manufacturing standpoint. If Apple is manufacturing 1 week 2,000 units in a given factory, and the next week they're manufacturing 4,000 units in a given factory, the variable costs associated with those particular manufacturing levels will change, right? Because you're needing more materials to make each iPhone that you produce, and each iPhone requires X amount of materials. So your variable costs would typically rise as your units would rise, and therefore the third factor is total costs, which is a combination of fixed costs and variable costs, would rise as well. Okay, so we've talked about fixed costs. Let's review variable costs again in terms of how they behave. The changes in the variable costs will change proportionately over the relevant range. Variable costs and revenue or unit changes will move in direct proportion to each other. So you want to, again, kind of get tattooed on your brain the idea that variable costs change on a per unit basis, because variable costs are typically the direct materials used to produce a product. Again, in the iPhone example, those would be the cost of a screen, the cost of a processor, the cost of a case, the cost of software. Every time you make an iPhone, you add additional costs to your manufacturing, which then again affects your total costs. Okay, so we've talked about fixed costs, we've talked about variable costs. Now there's a third category, which is called semi-variable costs. Now, these are kind of strange birds in that they're not necessarily fish or fowl. They don't necessarily change proportionally, with volume. They may remain fixed for a certain period of time. That's why they're called mixed costs. And this is is an example on this particular chart. As you can see on the y-axis, costs tend to be relatively flat over a given period of or a given number of units, and then as you can see, there's almost like a step function where those costs increase over another set of units. And a good way to visualize this is, let's say you start a business and you open a factory, and it's a relatively small factory, but you're doing pretty well, and your fixed costs tend to remain steady as long as you're producing in that factory. You only pay one utility bill for that factory. But let's say your business becomes really successful and you open another factory. Well, now you have two utility bills, one for factory number one, one for factory number two. So the mixed semi-variable costs will change as a result of your success. So guys, we have three important concepts here. We've talked about we've talked about fixed cost, variable cost, and semi-variable cost. Please review these because this is foundational information that you'll be using for the rest of this particular chapter. Have a great night, guys.